okay, or you want to?
Yeah, we're good. Folks, welcome to a special on-site edition of the Jake Feinberg Show here in Napa Valley, and joined today by a man who's part of the lineage of one of the families, the pioneer families of wine, and being able to industrialize wine and bring it to the entire world. Michael Mondavi carries on today with the Mondavi family winery. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show, Michael.
It is a pleasure to be on your show. Thanks a lot.
Can you just talk about the culture of wine that you grew up watching your uncle and your dad, how they cultivated that culture that wound up spreading to the world?
It was, the luxury I had is from the time I was 6 months old, I grew up literally 100 yards from the Charles Krug winery, which was my family's winery back then. And to me, being in the cellars, being in the vineyard, was as natural as walking or sitting down. My grandmother was also a great influence on me because she insisted on, she was a wonderful cook, but the fruits, the vegetables had to be very good and healthily grown. They didn't know the words organic.
What does healthily grown mean? This is important. I was going to ask you about, if you can sort of segue, because your grandfather was the one that procured the fruit in Minnesota.
Yes.
So he knew. So what did that mean exactly?
Well,
because there was no word for organic.
There was no word for organic, but an example, my grandfather took me out in the field when I was about 11, picked up a handful of the soil, put it right under my nose and said, "Smell it. This is clean. This is healthy." And he wipes it off his hands and he says, "When you grow up, what's your most important job?" And I said, "Make good wine." And he said, "No, that's important, but what's your most important job?" And I said, "Make a profit." And he said, "No, that's important, but your most important job, someday this land will belong to you and your siblings and your cousins. When you have children, the most important job is having this soil in healthier condition when you give it to the children than you received it from your father or your uncle." He didn't know a thing about biodynamic, organic. He just knew if you respect the soil and try to make it healthy, it would grow good product for you, whether it was tomatoes, grapes, cauliflower. It didn't matter.
Can you talk about when you got to a point, even as in the apprenticeship, when you would go and taste the grape and you say, "Just needs one more day or two more"? Can you talk about when you got in that zone and what that feeling was like?
Well, at first, you taste the grapes and they go from being sour to a little tart to sweet, and you go, "Wow, they're ready." And my grandfather would say, "No, chew the skin. See if there's a little bite to it. That bite is the tannin, which is a natural component of the grape, and it gives you the abrasiveness on the side of the tongue. You want a soft tannin, not a sharp tannin." You and I could go out in the field in September, October, and within 30 minutes, you would know the difference between a grape that needed to be harvested 3 days from now or today. And it's just a matter of taste. It's not a special skill, it's just a training. My father and grandfather knew the result of wines made from the grape picked 2 or 3 days early or 2 or 3 days late. Growing up young, I didn't know. I just knew, ooh, this one tastes good, this one tastes sweeter. But then experiencing over a period of 5 or 6 harvests, tasting the grapes, these were a little less ripe, here's the result of the wine. These were perfectly ripe, here's the result of the wine. You could get a direct correlation as that wine aged and matured. And then the palate memory came into play. And the next year, and the following year, and the following year, you go out and taste the grape and you go, these are not ready yet. Or, ooh, we'd better get these picked today because tomorrow or the next day may be too much sugar.
talking to Michael Mondavi here on the Jake Feinberg Show. Your dad was a big proponent of education, and I wanted you to talk about the work that you do and what your businesses do with cardiologists, people in the medical field, to talk about the benefits of moderate wine consumption as it correlates to a healthy heart.
We really learned about the healthy heart and the beneficial role that moderate regular consumption of wine had was really from what's called the French paradox. And
Dr. Rachaud.
a number of doctors did a study. And how could the French, who eat all this wonderful rich brie and camembert cheese, smoke, don't exercise, eat foie gras, and have less heart disease than Americans who try to have a healthy diet? And they found the common denominator was the French were drinking red wines with those rich foods, and the Americans were not. And they were able to find that the tannins and the components of the wine really helped to clear the arteries of plaque or prevent plaque from growing. And Louis Pasteur, going way back before them, said wine is the most natural and healthful of all beverages and nature's tranquilizer. Enjoy it in moderation. So part of the benefit wasn't just the chemical makeup of the wine as such, it was also that the French, when they were enjoying wine with their meal, would relax, would have wonderful conversations with their friends, less tension, less heart disease.
What do you think about just the amount of processed food in the United States? Don't you think that's a factor?
I don't have medical experience, but I try not to eat any processed foods. For example, when I fly on the airplanes, I try to bring food from home so that I know that it's natural, not processed. And to me, the worst thing of processed foods, are preservatives. And the foods need to be natural, just like the wines. The reason Louis Pasteur liked wine is it was natural.
What was the jug wine industry like? And also, is there a way to paint the picture about what the wine, the black market when it was during Prohibition? What was that like? Could you just fill the audience in on that, if anything?
Well, during Prohibition, it was legal to produce 200 gallons of wine per household, but you could not sell it as a product. And so many of the French, Italian, German immigrants started shipping grapes and winemaking supplies and selling them so that families could make their own barrel or two of wine. 200 gallons is 4 barrels of wine. That's a fair amount of wine. A lot of the restaurants back then would buy barrels of wine from families. And I know my grandfather would go to a restaurant all the time, and they had black coffee cups. Most coffee cups are white, right? They had black coffee cups. And in the evening, they'd ask for some red coffee. And they would serve red wine in the black coffee cups with the dinner.
Great story.
And you couldn't tell the difference from looking at it.
Unbelievable.
Was it coffee or was it red wine?
Just circling back, are you aware of the cardiologists out there and the people that are trying to? Or do you work with any about education as it relates to how to talk to the people about moderate? See, the thing of it is moderate consumption. There's that fine line there. So, do you work with any doctors or cardiologists?
Well, there's a group called the Medical Friends of Wine, and it's made up of medical doctors who enjoy wine, and they also preach the moderate consumption of wines. And, it's interesting. You talk to people in France and Italy and say, what is moderate consumption of wine? And they're going to say a glass or two a meal. meaning lunch and dinner. You talk to someone in the United States, what is moderate? It's going to be a glass a day. So the perspective of people in Europe on what's moderate consumption and the perspective in the United States on what's moderate consumption is quite different.
Who are some of the, Bolinas had this real deep poet. A lot of poets used to hang out there, and I'm just curious about, like, did Coppola come and hang at the? Who was your father close with from the entertainment world?
Well, Francis Ford Coppola and my father were very, very good friends.
I felt that in my gut today. Yeah.
And Eleanor, his wife, was is a wonderful lady. And when you were with Francis and Eleanor in their home, or when they were in your home, it was just like any other old friend being with you. There was no pretense about it. He would roll up his sleeves and get in the kitchen and kind of over-talk Eleanor as she's cooking and cook right alongside. But he
was flipping pizzas, right? I mean,
but in his own right, he is a very good cook.
Yeah, right.
My grandmother, I think Frances would do the same. My grandmother never said she was a chef. She was just a great cook for the family. And I think that Frances would fit that bill perfectly.
How did you have to adapt your marketing or sales side when wine started to go to the public sector? I mean, not the public sector, but it went on the market, became bigger and less. I know you're trying to. I mean, your mottos are great. Family, real families, real wines. Yeah. So getting back to that sort of intimacy.
Well,
but how did you adapt during that time?
From repeal of Prohibition through World War II and up through the 60s, 80+% of all wines sold in America was port, sherry, or muscatel, all about 20% sugar, 20% alcohol. It was not table wine. It was not the type of wine people in France or Italy or in the United States would sit down and enjoy with dinner.
Exactly.
It's only in the last 30, 40 years where good table wine, I don't mean fancy, I just mean it tastes good with food, table wine started becoming more and more popular. And part of it was the French paradox that we spoke of earlier about wine being healthy and good for you.
Has there been anything, that was like 91, I saw the 60
Yes.
minute. I mean, has there been anything to add to that? That was a little while ago.
No, but there have been duplicative studies, if you will, that have confirmed that. And the fact that it's not news means it doesn't get publicized a lot, but people should be reminded of that, because rather than taking Lipitor or some other medicines
a very good point.
to minimize statins, to minimize your cholesterol, why not have a nice glass of red wine with dinner?
Your father, was he a big music fan?
Yes, but he didn't. If you were to ask him what his favorite song was or who his favorite composer was, he'd struggle with an answer.
But
He
I mean,
loved
like,
listening to music.
was he in the classical bag? What kind of music did he like?
He loved jazz.
Were there cats that used to come and hang at the house?
No, we didn't have a musical house as such. We had more of a food and beverage house.
Absolutely, but Coppola was there. You knew Francis. I mean, what I'm saying is, like, there were no musicians that came.
We would have in July the summer jazz series of concerts.
Really?
Four Saturdays in a row.
Was it Red River, or what was it called?
On the fourth, no, it was called the Robert Mondavi Summer Jazz Series.
Oh, beautiful.
And every year, the closest Saturday to the 4th of July, Preservation Hall Jazz Band for 25 years came and performed. And they were spectacular. Ella Fitzgerald came and sang. George Shearing. We had great musicians, and it was that type of music. It wasn't a specific classical type music, whatever, but it was more of I'd call it the broad, soft jazz.
No, could you talk about how your dad translated the listening and the conversation of jazz into how he ran his business? I mean, there's a concept in jazz of just opening your ears and then there's having a musical conversation. Is there a parallel to the cultivation of good wine?
Absolutely. You could take people who've never tasted wines before, give them a average quality, say Chardonnay, a good quality Chardonnay, and a great Chardonnay, and just say, taste these three wines, put them in order of preference. They won't confuse the top and the bottom. Sometimes they'll mix one or two if there were a couple in the middle. But they're going to say, this wine doesn't really taste that good, or it has a funny aftertaste. On the one that the expert and the novice agree on, they're going to say, I just like it. This tastes good.
Right.
I like the way it smells. You don't have to be an expert to know what tastes good. If it tastes good to you, it's good. If it doesn't taste good to you, 9 times out of 10, the expert will agree that's not a very good wine.
Can you talk about a time in your life when you faced adversity? It could be anything. How you overcame it, how it made you a stronger person?
We had, as we were starting our company at Robert Mondavi, we were selling about a third of the wine in tank trucks to other wineries. And we'd crush the grapes in September and October. We'd give them samples in November. They'd approve the samples in November. We'd ship the wine in December, be paid in January, and that helped the finances of the company to where we could then take the balance of the wine, put it into barrel, age it for a year or two, bottle it, and then sell it. In 1974, this large company that had a contract with us for 3 more years terminated the contract because the economy went south and they didn't want to continue. And so they said, we're not buying any of the bulk wine, and if you don't like that, sue us. And we checked with our attorneys. The attorneys said, you have a very solid contract. You'll win the lawsuit. They'll appeal. You'll win the appeal, and you'll go bankrupt at the same time because it'll take you 4 years.
Right.
So we said, well, there's no sense in suing them because we can't afford to pay the attorneys and lose.
Oh, man.
And
Great.
so I took all of the white samples home and all the red samples home and got graduated cylinders, and I proportionately measured all the white wine into a single blend of white wine and all of the red into a single blend of red table wine. And I then served those for my wife and I with dinner. And I said to my wife, what do you think of this? And she said, wow, these taste good. In fact, she said, I think this blend is better than some of the because there was Cabernet and Zinfandel and Syrah and 4 or 5 different red varieties. She said, I like the blend better than some of these others. So I went back to the winery the next day with these master blends, showed them to my father, and said, Dad, we can't sell this to others because the grape price and the wine prices crashed to about 20% of what it used to be. But if we convert bulk wine, the commodity, to a consumer product and call it white table wine by Robert Mondavi, red table wine by Robert Mondavi, and just put it in a magnum bottle, not a jug with a screw cap, I think we can sell this 300,000 gallons of wine within a year in the bottle and make a profit. A long story short,
Wow.
we did that.
Prior to that, what was the amount? How much money were you bringing in?
Well, prior to that, we were selling about 8,000 cases of wine a year,
Right.
of our higher priced, higher quality Cabernets, Chardonnays, etc. And this was the wine that we would produce and sell in tank trucks, and 5,000 gallons per unit to other wineries. And we were able to successfully make that blend. Most of the jug wine had a lot of residual sugar. Residual sugar in wine is fine for the person who's been drinking Coca-Cola their whole life and has never had wine, but in a little while they're going to go, ooh, it's too sweet. It doesn't invite me to have a second glass with my meal. So we made this wine purposely dry like a Cabernet or Pinot Noir, just a blend, and it took off. And as a result of that company refusing to honor their contract, it forced us to create this new white table wine or red table wine, and it ended up developing into what we called Woodbridge, which became the largest single brand of wine in America.
Wow. But at some point it went, you called it table wine.
Yes.
That was to make it sound. I want you to talk to people that are watching worldwide about why abstinence only is from alcohol is that's not. There needs to be a bigger debate. It's not just abstain from that. I want you to talk talk to those people.
Some people should never have alcohol. They're allergic to it. My wife's allergic to shellfish. She should never have shellfish, even though she likes the taste. It will have her break out. It can close her throat. Same is true with alcohol. Certain people can't tolerate it and shouldn't drink it. For the vast majority of the people, as Louis Pasteur said, wine is very healthful and beneficial in moderation, but that's the key. My grandparents taught myself, my siblings, and my cousins moderation from a very early age. When we were 7 or 8 years old, they just used little jelly jars, and they'd put about half an inch of wine in it, and the rest water.
Sure.
And then as we got older, there was more wine, less water, more wine, less water. But if they ever saw us a little tipsy, if we'd consumed too much wine, it was an insult to the family. And we were
don't
in
embarrass the
serious
family.
trouble. Don't embarrass the family. And they looked at drinking too much wine or any alcohol the same as gluttony. Eating a healthy diet of food is good, but if you need 3,000 calories and are eating 8,000 calories, that's not healthy or good for you either. And it's even more true with wine and alcohol. Moderation is the key.
What can you speak to as far as it relates to combining a healthy lifestyle, a good diet, and moderate alcohol consumption? Why is it? What is it about that is important, especially doing it amongst your friends in a social situation?
Well, what I like when I go home, or if friends come over to the house, or if we go visit friends, and even if it's on a weekend, you want to relax in the evening. You may have had chores during the day, or you may have had certain projects during the week. You're working. Personally, I don't drink many spirits, vodka, bourbon, or stuff like that, because I don't like the hit. It's too intense for me. So I like either a glass of rosé on the rocks or a glass of white wine as an aperitif. And in the summer, if it's hot, I'll get a little soda water and pour a little soda water in and make almost a wine spritzer, so that I dilute it again, but I have just a little alcohol in the wine that helps me relax, and it tastes really good.
You just had your staff, your entire staff meeting everybody from the country came in. Setting aside the bottom line, what creatively still drives you today?
The thrill of working with people and watching them grow and be able to grow beyond anything I've done. I had the pleasure of working with my uncle, with my father, as I was growing up, and particularly my uncle taught me more about the science of wine. And he said, the more you learn about any subject, the more you know you have to learn about that subject. Once you stop learning, you and your mind will atrophy. And if I can keep active and keep learning, what's interesting, when I was in my 40s, 50s, people were saying, well, Michael, you're a good teacher about wine and marketing and selling. I'm now in my 70s, and I'm becoming a good student about marketing and selling. Where I'm
What have you
learning-
learned recently?
Learning from the younger people, communications like we are talking today. The iPhone, the internet, the texting, the tweeting, there is more information transferred every day today in those techniques than there was ever transferred before on the history of wine. People are in, our job for 30 years has been take the mystery out of wine, keep the magic. People are intimidated about wine. What wine do I serve with this food? Ooh, is this Chardonnay oaky or is it non-oaky?
Mm-hmm.
If we can take the mystery out of wine, people enjoy it more. They don't need more tension trying to figure out what to drink. The texting, you go on, take a shot of the screen or the QR code, you'll have all the information you want on those wines. It is beautiful today. It's the greatest education and marketing tool in the history of wine.
So can you talk about some of what your younger staff has enlightened you to, and as it relates to marketing?
One of our staff just went to the week-long leadership course at Disney World in Orlando. And there are 45 people in that course. And what they were teaching everyone there was that every single person is a leader, regardless of your education, regardless of your position in the business or the community. And make sure you understand your personal values first and the values of the company you work with. And then always ask yourself, am I living within these values? And what's wonderful is...
Did you say there was subset 1B? You said first, know your own, who you are, and then you
Yes.
said know the company, but is that 1B or is that one? Is that in the same level as
That's
one?
one. And then secondly is understanding and practicing those values. What is your vision? Essentially, whether you're 10 years old or 80 years old, what do you want to do when you grow up? That's your vision. Your values are how you're going to do it, how you're going to treat people. And I think, with all the problems that we hear about every day in the world today, if people would focus on family values and show more respect to each other and a little more patience to each other, I think the world would be a healthier and happier place.
Before we go, your dad, his name is famous, but what was the nuanced genius about your father? Not that, because you just said your uncle was the science guy. He was the one doing the science, so everybody played a role. So what was your dad's true genius?
My father knew that if he could get the wine into the customer's mouth with a meal, that they would enjoy it. And he knew that we could produce consistently wines equal to or better here in the Napa Valley than anywhere in the world. And that if he could market and sell that wine, it would be successful. The key was the wine has to invite you back into the glass. My grandmother said to my father and myself, make wine that tastes good. Her definition, if you were tasting Cabernet, she wouldn't describe Cabernet. What she would say is, if you're having Cabernet at dinner, you know how it tastes good? The glass gets empty and they want another glass. If the glass doesn't get empty, you go back to work because the wine doesn't taste good.
How do you think my generation handles those directions these days?
I think your generation is far better than when I started selling wine in the 60s and 70s, early 80s, because then it was someone had to recommend it or it had to have a specific rating. The younger generation today are trusting your palate first and then using materials for reference to learn about it. And that is the best. If it tastes good to you, it's good. If it doesn't taste good to you, it's not good. I don't care if it's 100-point wine that's #1 in the world.
Michael Mondavi, it's an honor to connect with you. I look forward to doing more in the future, especially as it relates to. Can you talk about that organization one more time?
The Medical Friends of Wine?
Yeah, who do you know in that is around on the West Coast?
Well, unfortunately, the
It's you.
guy I
Oh,
know
no.
has retired and is waning right now in his years. But I can follow up with you and get you a couple of really good contacts from the Medical Friends of Wine.
What is the direction of wine as you see it, especially as it relates to distribution? Where do you want to see it go, and where is it trending?
Right now, the distribution is in the United States. We don't sell wine in the United States. We sell wine in 50 independent countries because we have to sell to a wholesaler in each state who then sells to the retailer or restaurateur in each state. And
But there's only one wholesaler in each state.
no, there are multiple wholesalers in each state, but there used to be dozens, and now there are like 3 or 4.
Why does that hurt? Why does that hurt the overall integrity of the wine?
Well, one example is our wholesaler here in California represents 460 beer, wine, and spirits suppliers, has over 20,000 individual items that they're selling. And many of those 470 companies are quite large. Who do you think is going to get the majority of the focus and attention of the salesperson?
Biggest ones.
The biggest ones. So we have to make sure that we have reason for the salesperson to want to present our wines to the restaurant or the wine shop. And what we found the best way of doing it is through education. Wine is still sold through relationships of a salesman or a saleswoman presenting the wine to a buyer at a store or a restaurant. And if we can teach the salesperson of the wholesaler why the wines that we produce and represent are going to be more beneficial for that customer, then we have a chance of competing with the big boys.
Who was the most famous athlete that ever came and hung out with you guys?
Oh, I had the luxury
Yes.
of spending an afternoon with Joe Dimaggio.
Let's break that down. I mean, where was he?
He came to Napa, and we were working with a producer from Southern California by the name of Walper, Mr. Walper. And he would bring Hollywood stars and athletes to Napa, and we were the winery sponsor. And we would
Were you the only one?
We were the only winery
You're the only
sponsor.
winery sponsor.
And we would raise money.
What year was it, by the way?
This was in the 80s and 90s. We'd raise monies for the Boys and Girls Clubs. And I had the luxury of playing 9 holes of golf with Joe Dimaggio. And he was quite on in years. He could only hit the ball about 150 yards, but he hit it straight every time, and it was smooth. And he was the most gentleman with humility that I'd ever met. I wish that he could be reincarnated and young people today could see an example of a great
Was he,
athlete.
did you
and a
talk to
great
him, or was
man.
he very soft-spoken too?
He was soft-spoken, but if he was in a crowd, he was shy. But if it was like you and I, he'd talk to you the same way he'd talk to his brother.
Michael Mondavi, thank you for being part of the program,
It's a
my friend.
pleasure to be with you.
Talk
Thank
to you
very
soon.
much.
Bye-bye.